core argument of my newest project here, um, and the basis for this talk is that apothecaries, druggists, and pharmacists are deeply entangled in overlapping processes of capitalism, psychoactivity, addiction, and in several ways. A lot of work has been developed around pharmaceuticals and the pharmacy, among those me, but comparatively little when it comes to adjacent intoxicants and the pharmacy realm. So these include alcohol, tobacco, coffee, sugary substances. And I think it's worth theorizing to a greater extent how pharmacies in various manifestations fit within history of intoxicants, business, and medical and cultural history. In my reading of 19th and 20th century pharmacy, it has become clear that the literature is indeed under theorized. Today's 20-minute talk then represents an early effort to conceptualize pharmacies as pleasure meccas, using the architecture, addiction, and economic tent poles, so to speak. So pharmacists and pharmacies, or chemists and apothecaries, are key drivers in the marketplace. We know that. They also serve as key components in healthcare provision. In the United States, they serve as the endpoint of the American pharmaceutical supply chain and the global pharmaceutical supply chain. But pharmacists, more generally, are the dispensers of a wide-ranging set of consumer goods. Some of these are non-threatening and others are potentially harmful to public health. So over the course of the 20th century, beginning at the end of uh, really beginning at the end of the 19th century, you begin to see pharmacy practices changing, becoming more uniform. And that's a process that this paper will narrate provisionally and preliminarily. More broadly, I think this paper adds to knowledge about the tangible ways that medical and healthcare spaces are constructed, organized, designed to help patient consumers, obviously, but also generate profits. So architecture and design, it's become clear to me, matters much more to the history of intoxicants than I had previously thought, even just a year and some ago. Based on unused corporate records, on guides and manuals, on photographs and management documents, this paper, I hope, will give you a flavor of the underexplored interiority of pharmacies, basically the store's guts, the insides, the processes of organization, and then how this is related to habit changing substances. So I'm going to show some of those primary sources in the second part of the talk. And in the first part of the talk, I'm going to introduce you to some of the secondary sources that have influenced me. Admittedly, I'm working on a time period, 19th and 20th century, that is quite different from the focus of this conference. And I should thank the organizers for involving me. But I think in the final stage of this talk, I'm going to raise some questions that should hopefully have some utility for people who are working in disparate temporal and geographical regions than my own. So anyone who has been in a casino or a nightclub will recognize that the atmospheres have been carefully designed and curated, sometimes in very intricate maze-like ways to encourage certain behaviors. So for the anthropologist Natasha Dow Scull, who has written about gambling in particular, interior design and the building of casinos was meant to take interior states and aim them towards specific behaviors. And that's what she calls addiction by design. Annabelle Wharton, meanwhile, has suggested that buildings have served as negative architectural agents, and that both physical and digital structures may act, and I quote, badly, unquote, just as the occupants of these realms might do. So the design of buildings or real or digital spaces have served to encourage harmful behaviors in her mind. And then there's David Courtwright's recent The Age of Addiction, where he comes up with this term pleasure mecca, of which I'm cribbing for this paper. He suggests that from bars to brothels or from Disneyland to Las Vegas, commercial environments uh, have sold potentially addictive products in, and I quote, evolving hedonic formulas, unquote. And these formulas have adapted over time to generate revenue. So what that means is spaces and places have had a blending of different intoxicants. And this is sort of the formula he's referring to. So salty food in a pub, free pipes in a pub, free drinks at a casino, and so on and so forth. And so pleasure meccas in his rendering essentially lead to, and I quote, sequential or overlapping consumption, unquote. Julia Skelly, the a scholar of visual culture and history, has also influenced me in this work, which is somewhat provisional. So she chronicles intoxicant-related spaces in her article, Addictive Architecture, the Crystal Palace, Jinn's Palaces and Women's Desire. So here she provides what I think is a fascinating historical analog to help understand modern pharmacies. In her view, drinking establishments in 17 and 1800 Britain were addictive spaces where potential addictions were believed to be initiated and exacerbated. So she draws on visual culture, feminist theories, and literary analysis to deconstruct material sites as bound up in and intricately related to discourses of addiction. So she looks at early gin palaces in the 1700s, which were, as she suggests, and I quote, hidden from view and known only to local customers, unquote. And then she contrasts that with the Crystal Palace built in Hyde Park, London, which was grand and glossy. It was ornate and it was ostentatious. It wasn't hidden at all. It shouted innovation, it shouted wealth, and its addictive architecture had much to do with the blurring of meanings of luxury and need. And then finally, for my secondary literature, I've also drawn the work of Susan Porter Benson, the author of Palace of Consumption and Machine for Selling, who has looked at American department stores. Fascinating stuff. So before I turn to primary sources and give you a sense of the sort of the work that the sort of the concrete sources that I'm using, I'll just mention that besides the intoxicants that I've mentioned already, prescription drugs have been very well explored by scholars, but alcohol, tobacco, and hyper palatable foods, sugary foods for the most part, are deeply imbricated in the drugstore or pharmacy, really from colonial times, right from when these sorts of businesses operated on the shores of the United States. And what I've tried to do is evaluate and understand essentially what Julia Skelly referred to as luxury and need, innovation and wealth within these stores. And I've tried to get a better evidence-based notion of what Courtwright has referred to as the hedonic formula and the blending or combinations of goods within these stores. So now, as promised, I'm going to share some of my primary source materials with you. First of all, digging through the archives, I've tried to historicize the method by which pharmacy spaces were redesigned over the course of the 20th century, as well as the messages behind that effort and, as good historians might do, who or what drove that architectural design. So above, you see manuals that come from different companies, McKesson and from Park Davis and Company, which then later became Pfizer. And these manuals are sold to pharmacists and drugstore owners to get them to, excuse me, update the way that they are actually running their business. The architecture and display of pharmacies and drugstores, just like the design of banks or post offices or general stores, was not and are not completely standardized. Uh, the floor plans, the massing, the facades, the interior and exterior have all varied considerably. And so companies which either manufacture drugs or are large healthcare companies have attempted to influence and modernize how these businesses conducted themselves, how they operated. So to give you in the most general terms possible over an overview, you don't see uniformity in pharmacies and drugstores in the United States in any sort of tangible way until the 1940s. Then you begin to see more and more standardization, and I'll show you some of that standardization in a second. So what I've done is I've read trade magazines, industry pamphlets, and other advertisements suggesting different plans, floor plans, ideas, services, products, and materials that would convey to the consumer, patient consumer, mind you, a sense of progress and a sense of modernity. Here are a couple of pamphlets that came from Johnson & Johnson and McKesson and Robbins again. I've deliberately chosen Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson because they have been, at least in the United States, so much on the tip of everyone's tongues because of vaccine development. But these pamphlets, manuals that I've unearthed are so wonderful. They're so wonderfully crass and they're so wonderfully purposeful in suggesting to drugstore owners and to pharmacists that you need to modernize, that selling is easy, that you can be a success and you can make tons of money through a bit of dynamism. What these manuals and other manuals do is showcase the absolute imperativeness of updating your floor plans and getting an someone who has got design or architectural skills in place. So this is an advertisement from McKesson. The idea behind this two-page advertisement is that you need a trained architectural agent to modernize your store, to better sell the intoxicants. I don't want to lose the point necessarily. The idea is, of course, that there are prescription drugs that are being sold and manifold other products, but the intoxicants are also of the utmost value. So apart from moving stock and storing that given stock, whether or not it's cases of wine or whether or not it's candy, whether or not it's cameras, what these manuals suggested to store owners was the need to update one's thinking about how to organize the store. So one needed to inculcate notions of behavioral science, traffic flow and patterns within the store to better track how your customers operated within the store. One also needed to update advertising. And the idea was to maximize space, maximize comfort, and then hence maximize profitability within the given store. So traffic flow, as you can see on the right of the screen, this is one of the grid papers that were suggested you use. This came from Meccas and Robbins, and it would allow store owners to better understand the circulation of individuals within the confines of the store. And if you better understood how people moved throughout the store, and this is very big brotherish, right? You're actually watching everyone walk throughout your store. If you had a better understanding of how people did this, how they actually physically walk through the store, then you could better position where your goods would be placed within the store. That makes sense, probably. And so here is another grid design, architectural grid design. Uh, the bottom of this layout, what you see, the very bottom is tobacco situated beside the bar, which is situated beside the cigars, which is situated by the candy, which is then obviously situated by the soda fountain. So this is the sugar, this is the nicotine, this is the alcohol, all placed in one relatively easy to find spot. And then you have an island just above with the box candy. And then you have the toiletries, and then you have another island with the packaged ice cream. If you had a better understanding of how people operated within your store and you tracked sales, then you could structurally redesign these given areas. So just to drill down a little bit farther here, each of these areas are arranged, built, and designed, and then organized discreetly in very calculated ways. So the tobacco area is organized in a very special way, and there are lots of different instructions that came from manufacturers and from different trade magazines to tell you how to organize your tobacco area, how to modernize your tobacco area, whether it was cigars or whether it was cigarettes, whether or not it was pipes, and what other kind of adjacent products one ought to be selling. And again, if you had a better understanding of traffic flow in your store, then you could come up with what kind of pattern would best be suited for you. Did you want to have an off-the-wall style for your customers? Did you want to have a self-selection style? Where did you want to put your cigars and candy relative to the RX department? Where did you want to have your soda fountain where you could get your uh, your your bubble tea and everything else? You know, did you want to have a lobby checkout style, or did you want to have a center service style? These were all options that were provided by companies to independent and chain store drugstore owners. And so here's one photograph from a store in California. It's just worth lingering on this for a minute or two. You have uh, liquor and cigars in large neon 3-foot lights at the top, and then just below that in paneled lighting, wines, liqueurs, and lighters that are booming to customers, that there is an interrelationship between these intoxicants. So you'd walk into this store and you'd see that was the area that you might gravitate towards. Not only did you have all sorts of pipes here on offer, but then you have these paraphernalia that help you, whether or not it's a shaker, whether it's not a wine opener, what have you. And so there are very straightforward ways that pharmacy owners and drugstore owners would organize their stock. And again, here's just another image. This is not an image you necessarily associate with a pharmacy, but this is also this is a pharmacy in California, part of the Owl chain. And you know, when you dig deeper,
sorry,
yes,
we have to start to wrap up because we've passed 20 minutes. So
absolutely.
thank you.
Yep. This is just to dig very deeper into how one might organize the wine section within the store. And again, this is, you know, part of a larger design in the store. I'm not going to say much more other than that the sugar sections, the candy sections often abutted the the tobacco areas, and there's sometimes very fluffy, pastoral, fuzzy candy sections. So that's it for me. I just apologies for going over there by a little bit. I'll wrap up by saying that, you know, I appreciate your attention. I look forward to your questions. Pharmacy spaces were calculatingly built and organized, redesigned in very precise ways to maximize profits. And I think for the purposes of this conference, as an architectural health historian, David Theodore, has argued, modern hospitals came to be seen and planned as non-healing environments during the 20th century. So was this the case with pharmacies in the United States? And how far can we extrapolate in both a temporal and geographical sense? So taking what we know or preliminarily know about how these spaces are designed in the United States over the course of the 20th century, does this help us think about the design of such shops in the 1800s and the 1700s, and perhaps even further back? And so thank you kindly. And again, apologies for going over.